Now, there's a lot of self-help books out there, but how many actually self-help books really are helpful for ADHD? Well, I'm going to share my top 3 books that have been life-changing for my ADHD. Now, the very first one is The One Thing by Gary Keller. Now, no pun intended here, but one of the biggest important principles that I found that was really helpful for me reading this book is that people with ADHD have that tendency to get overwhelmed with to-do list and feeling like they have to do all these different things all at once and trying to be like the average person or the neurotypical person, but come to find out that they just fail. I definitely struggled in this a lot. Now, the one thing really helps you identify what is the one thing that is important for you to focus on that's going to be the most impactful for not only for that day, but also for the rest of your life. Because when you can identify the most important thing that you should do that day, or maybe even the 3 most important things that you should do that day, is that will have a domino effect that will create extraordinary results over time because you're being consistent and focusing on the most important thing that can impact your ADHD life. The second principle that I learned from this book is understanding how willpower works. It talks about in this book that willpower, we only have so much willpower in the day. In fact, they talk about how it's a meter and it gets depleted over time. And there's certain things that definitely deplete our willpower, and especially understanding someone with ADHD. One of the big things they talk about is how distractions can deplete that willpower meter. And knowing us people with ADHD, we get distracted all the time. So it talks about how it's so important to really find all those distractors and eliminate those so that way your willpower can last longer than the average person. But also they talk about how it's important to do the most important things at the beginning of the day so that way you get it finished versus trying to do it at the end of the day when you'll probably not have the willpower to do so. And a third principle directly from the book, a quote from Gary Keller, says that to achieve an extraordinary result, you must choose what matters most and give it all the time it demands. This requires getting extremely out of balance in relation to other work issues. An extraordinary life is a counterbalancing act. Now, I find this very interesting because we all want to live a work-life balance, but it really just does not exist. And us people with ADHD, most definitely, we experience that we feel like our life is just out of control. But if we actually believe in this quote that life isn't really about trying to make it completely balanced. In fact, it is this counterbalancing act that we have to constantly do between the struggle of work, family, friendships, school, all these things that we're juggling. You know, we can't expect to try to juggle all of them once. An actual great metaphor is about how we try to think that we can multitask, especially us people with ADHD, and you're juggling all these different balls, and one of them's going to drop. But it's important to understand that some of these balls might be rubber balls, and they'll be able to bounce back. And that's okay. You can maybe drop one of them and hyper-focus on maybe with your family, and then you've hyper-focus on just work. And it's this constant counterbalance, because the counterbalance, that's what it is when one drops, you can focus on then, and then you balance it right back to where it needs to. And it's this constant thing that we have to. And it talks about in the book how that principle helps us to push us to do extraordinary things, to push us to do hard things, and that's what makes us grow. The second book, you've probably heard of this one, is How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Now, a lot of people look at this book and think about like a sales book, but there's a lot of principles here. In fact, I remember my dad gave me this book at a very young age because I interrupted all the time with my ADHD. I would get into arguments. I actually had our time building friendships. Being in a big family of 9 kids, you know, I always try to butt in, and my dad realized that this was a problem, and he had me read this specific book because this book really, you could apply it to a lot of things in life, especially with ADHD, where we have maybe a hard time building those friendships and actually keeping relationships and be able to feel like we could fit in. And it's probably because we realize that we have all these challenges and we want to be heard and understood, and we can come across rude or just not understood, and so therefore people will ignore us. And so when I started reading this book, the big principles that I learned that made all the difference in my ADHD life is that one, you got to understand that everyone wants to feel like they're important. And so it's important to understand, what do others want? What is it that they want instead of always desiring what you want? So if you can figure out how to make someone feel important, that will return, you'll receive the respect and therefore build more friendships and relationships when you focus on what they want versus what you want. It's also important to appeal to other people's interests and understanding more too of what they really want by asking yourself questions. What do they appeal to? What do they aspire to? If you keep on doing that and have that mindset, you will find that you will have more friendships and be able to have more long-term relationships that that you so desire. The other great principle is that book really teaches about how everyone has something that they can teach you, no matter how big or small of what they know, but there's always something that you can learn from somebody. And by asking just lots of questions and being actually really engaged, intrigued in their life and understanding their frustrations and challenges, you can learn something from them. And by doing so, you will be more well respected, especially having ADHD. Now, if you're getting any value in today's video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, the bell notification where we talk everything here about ADHD and other ways to improve your mind. Now, the next great book is Atomic Habits by James Clear. This, I think, has been a really game changer that I've actually used a lot with my patients and clients because there's some great principles in here. One of them being is not focusing on goals, but actually focusing on the right systems and routines. Us people with ADHD, when we focus so much on trying to achieve a goal, a lot of times we won't make it. And this actually applies to a lot of people across the board. But when we actually focus on trying to find the right systems and routines, a daily habit that we're trying to do every single day, then that will actually eventually reach our goal because we're focused on that versus the goal itself. The second principle is also paying attention to your environment. When you actually pay attention to your environment, that actually might be sabotaging a lot of the habits and a lot of the habits that you're trying to form, especially such as distractions. This can be a really important key to eliminate a lot of those distractions that might be sabotaging your life success with your ADHD. Another great principle is also habit stacking. So a lot of people have a hard time trying to actually form new habits, but if you actually pair it with a habit that you already do on a day-to-day basis, such as like brushing your teeth and actually maybe having your supplements or your medications right next to your toothbrush, then you actually are using that principle of something you already do already and then making it a new habit. The other great principle is it talks about creating a group of people that actually will hold you responsible and accountable. So surrounding yourself with people that you aspire to, but also know who are going to keep you accountable so that you can succeed and actually fall through with actually creating these great systems and routines to form good habits. And one that I think is really important is Atomic Habits talks about the importance of constantly reviewing and analyzing your system. So it's always important to see what is working and what's not working, especially when you are creating new habits and systems and routines in your life, because if they aren't working, then you definitely want to adjust it or do something completely different. There's no point of doing something continuously if it isn't making the change and isn't working with your lifestyle. Now, there's multiple ways that you can be changing your life with your ADHD, and if you really want to dive in deep of how you actually can change your life in just a year, then watch this video next to really understand how to do that and how I help my patients and clients do so.